Hey everyone, welcome to the solution video for Workout Wednesday 2020, week 24, where we figure out if you can compare a 3-day versus 14-day moving average and describe the latest trend as it relates to COVID-19 data. I'm here along with Jamie, who is the developer of this challenge and who's going to walk us through how to solve the problem.
All right, so I'm Jamie. I work for Best Friends Animal Society, which is where the problem was brought up in a work environment. So at Best Friends, we have, we work with animal shelters around the country, and we have one of the largest no-kill animal sanctuaries in the country. And so we have these pet adoption centers, we call them life-saving centers, in various locations around the US, and we're starting to think about reopening. So as part of our reopening strategy, we wanted to take a look at the COVID data and build a visualization around that to let us know in those areas when it's going to be safe to reopen. So the first thing we started doing is searching for reliable data on COVID-19. So we went to the COVID-19 data hub that Tableau provided and downloaded the Jumpstart workbook. So this is where it all started. And initially, a large majority, it's global, but focused on the United States and has down to the county level. And it has positive cases and new cases for each reported date. So that's the level of granularity that we were looking for. And then I also started looking on Tableau Public for examples of what else people have started doing with the COVID data, and specifically for reopening. So that's where I found this visual, Let's Keep Things Flat, where it's looking kind of an analysis at the county level of whether the comparison to a 3-day moving average and a 14-day moving average, whether it's increasing on the trend or decreasing. So that's where we all got started. Okay, so we simplified it a bit for the challenge itself. We just wanted to keep it simple, look at one county at a time, and can we compare the 3-day to 14-day moving average? And also on top of that, describe the latest trend for the county. All right, where are we headed next? Should we start building a table?
Yeah, I think we should. And I think that we should answer the question, can you compare a 3-day moving average versus a 14-day? I think we're going to find out.
We're going to find out. It is indeed possible. So one of the interesting things when I looked at Tableau Public is whenever they were doing this type of comparison, a lot of the data preparation and the calculations was happening prior to bringing the data into Tableau Desktop. So what I wanted to figure out and what I started asking you about is, can we automate it all in desktop? All the calculations, all the trends, can we do it in desktop so that every day when we want to refresh our data, we don't have to do a bunch on the back end to prep it and get it ready, and just hit the refresh button and we're good to go. So let me switch over. I went ahead and downloaded a fresh version of the Jumpstart workbook from the Tableau Data Hub, and did some organization here, entered a couple of just more cosmetic and filtering calculations to start this table. So we have all the report dates. I've already added some parameters. So I'm looking at one county specifically and all the reported dates, and we have as of yesterday, the 29th. So all I have here initially are the new cases. So the first two things that we want, pull over my cheat sheet. First two things that we want are the moving average. We want the 3-day moving average and the 14-day. And these are just the standard calculations. Like if you the out of the box Tableau moving average, you could copy this calculation. It's a little bit easier to work with, and then I can use it in other calculations. So we're just doing the window average sum of the cases, and I actually want the new cases. And this is the 3-day. Duplicating that to create the 14-day and changing the days.
When you're working with, so I'll say this, when I'm working with table calculations, I like starting with a table. Do you usually do the same thing if you're building complex ones to see what's happening?
Yeah, typically the easiest way to make sure it's working correctly for me is to view it in the table format and to build it kind of piecemeal. So normally I think I end up with more calculations than what I might need, but it's easier for me to start with the basic ones and then like build it into a larger calculation. So I'm going to make sure that these are just going table down. And then we have our 3-day and 14-day moving average. Looks right to me. I'll trust the math. So next we're going to do the comparison. So we want to know what the trend is. So we're comparing the 3-day to the 14-day. And we'll start with if the sum of the new cases is equal to 0, then no reported cases. So if the 3-day is on the 14-day, then decrease. If the 3-day is greater than the 14-day, then increase. If they're equal, then no change.
So I'm curious, as you are building this, at what point when you were looking through what others have done and you're doing this, did you think that you would kind of hit a wall? I'm guessing you got to this point, you're like, yeah, I can compare two moving averages to each other.
Yeah, this is about as far as I got. And then I came knocking on your door. Yeah, this is the point where I was like, oh yeah, it's all making sense. Like I can do a moving average, I can do the comparison. And then the next piece, I think, is where it starts to get interesting. So I'm just going to pull this here. So this looks like it's working correctly. Assuming this is going down. Okay, so now we have our trend comparison, and then the next question that I started to ask is, okay, well, how many trends do we have? Like, how do we track what trend we're on? Because initially we're at no change, then we had a 1-day decrease, and then we have a multi-day increase, and then a decrease. So how do we start tracking the distinct number of trends? And this is where you need a Zen master to help you.
This is where my brain broke until we figured it out.
Yeah, this is where we had long conversations about running. So I'll start typing the calculation if you want to talk through it. But essentially, we want to know, we want to look at, so for the long increase trend, does this trend value match the previous trend value? If so, then we're going to do stuff. If not, then don't do stuff. Then it's the same.
Yeah. And I think it's important. You kind of said it, but the really difficult part for us, I think, to understand, or at least for me, was we knew we could track the trend that it was. We knew we could track if it was an increase, a decrease, or no change, but it was knowing if it was on the same as the day before. Knowing that piece of information and trying to figure out a way to do this, that took us a little bit of time. And so functionally, what we ended up doing was using the lookup function, which obviously makes sense in the long run, where we basically said, let's look at that trend result, and if it's the same as the one before, then we're going to make it a 0. Otherwise, we're going to make it a 1. And the nice thing about that is, if you think about the running sum, we're basically incrementing when it's on that same trend, as Jamie's calling it, so that we can start tabulating how many days it's been on a specific trend, and it basically restarts itself once a new trend occurs.
Easy, right? I mean,
of course.
Common sense.
It looks like a pretty simple calculation. 3 lines.
Of course, that's how you would do it. All right, so I'll pull this on.
Yeah. And this is actually what trend number it is. I think I misspoke a little bit, but this was nice because, and this really was you. Like you said, it looks like we can almost, like if we just knew which trend it was on, we could figure it out. And that kind of like unlocked the key to us saying, well, we can kind of identify if it's the first, set of repeating trended values, or the second or the third, or so on. So this was really promising when I saw it.
Yeah, so, and now when we start looking at, as of today, what's going on, and this is interesting, there are 0 reported cases for today, so we might have to choose a different county. Go
to Maricopa County.
Yeah, let's switch counties, just mid.
Not going to be good, Maricopa County. There you go.
So Maricopa County has been on a multi-day increase. But only new as of yesterday of 216. So, okay. So, and you were talking about the total days, like how long does each trend last, which is a second calculation. I forgot to warn you about this. I was recreating this earlier and I couldn't get this to work, so.
Well, we'll see what we can do. Well, the interesting thing about this calculation is, like, it's almost the most important one. Like, if you think about trying to tell someone what's happening, usually when I see COVID data in the news, they talk about like the number of cases today, reported yesterday or today, and then they talk about the total number. But it's really hard to see unless you see the trended data, like how long we've been on whatever the trajectory is. And so that's one of the things I really like about this calculation you're building, is you get good context on, okay, we're on an increasing trend. How long has that been happening?
Right. So this is the calculation.
Yes,
so this is doing this is doing the lookup and then offsetting by the last, correct?
Yes.
How is that different than -1?
So let me see if I can explain this again. So if the trend tally, this is what it's doing. So if the numbered trend, so like if we look at Monday, June 29th, that's the 23rd trend. If that number 23 is equivalent to the trend tally that is in the last row of the table, which is 23, then we're going to give it a 1, and then it will actually go back up. So it would start on Thursday, May 28th. And that last function is positional. So it's distance of the row from the end of the table. So by putting in that last function, we're basically saying, okay, offset wherever you are in the table by the distance from the last record in the table to find out what that final number is, and then compare your current row against it. And then again, if it matches, we give it a 1. We running sum that, because as long as it continues on that step, as we go down the table, we should get the number of days to increase. So realistically, we would expect that May 28th would have a 1, and then we'd continue to go down for however many days to June 29th. So we'll see if this works if you add it to the table. But that's the idea of it.
I'm confident that it works under the appropriate conditions. And there it is. Yeah, and what's really nice about this calculation is that it's counting the most recent trend. So it's starting and then counting total number of days it's been in the most recent trend. 33 days. Okay.
Not doing good, Arizona.
So could be doing better, not doing great.
Yeah.
Is it the worst county in the United States? That's another visualization. All right, so getting it in table format was kind of step one. And then what we really wanted is the visualization in a map. So are we ready to go down that path, or do we want to stay in the table format?
No, I think we're ready. And so what's interesting, and I want your perspective on this, like when we built this and we got to this point, I think I had a lot of confidence that we'd be able to build the map, because the map is basically what today, or, you know, the 29th is. I'm curious what your opinion was when we got to this point, if you thought we'd be able to put it in a map.
I was pretty confident, but I also know that I've struggled with table calculations in maps in the past because it doesn't always work the way that I expect it to. So I was confident but realistic that we would encounter issues.
Good answer.
All right.
But yeah, I hear you on the map, because as you're building it, what I think is going to become clear from the solution perspective is like the detail in the table is much easier to understand and build the table calculations than when you have it laid out in a map. Like, yes, there's a virtual table there, but you can't really see it. And so it's harder to work with it.
Right. So I'm going to start pulling on some fields. I'm going to add a few more filters before I bring on the table calcs, because I've learned lessons in Tableau. So a few of these filters that I've created, one is the selected state filter, and it uses the selected state value. So one thing I did here after I created a parameter to change the county is I just split it, because I know that the county value, there's a delimiter between the state name and the county name. So I'm just pulling the state value of what's been selected. And then I use that in a calculation to filter to the state. So I'm going to pull that onto filter, because I only want to look at the state that is relevant or selected. I'm going to add to context. Okay. I'm going to resist the urge to format.
Like, I probably would have right-click and hid the null indicator, but you're doing good.
I'll do it for, just for you. Don't get me started, or we'll be here in 20 minutes just formatting this visual. All right, what do I need to do? Change this as well. And I'm going to go ahead and pull some measures, and we'll do the tooltip at least, so it's easier to hover over and make sure things are working. New cases and total, pull total cases and the trend total days. All right, so we have a map and we don't have any color, and I don't think our trends are working correctly because everything says 1 day, no reported cases. So there is a final piece to this calculation that we're missing. And we need our last date record filter.
And this is where like the magic happens, because like your map technically right now, it's like every single day is sitting on a county. So you're just seeing it sort of sorted by the first reported date. And now you're going to do some magic. So we just see that last date or most recent date.
Yes. So this seems pretty simple. It's just last equals 0, which is in a way kind of similar to some of the funky logic we were doing earlier, if I understand that correctly. It's trying to find the most recent date.
Yep, the last row of the table, the virtual table we've created.
So we'll put this on filter, we'll set it to true, and then we need to do some editing. This was a tricky step. So one thing we needed to make sure that we do is order these appropriately. So I struggled with this for a bit of time where I kind of get it working because I didn't have the state name at the top. Yeah.
Move your state and county combined up, I want to say.
Isn't working appropriately?
Oh, maybe it is. Maybe it is. I guess it could be. Hard to tell with the hover over some of the counties. You might actually have it right.
Well, we haven't updated the calculations yet. So
okay.
I think it'll be easier if we start adding color as well. So let me get the color in there and we'll start pulling it together. So one thing I did for the color, I'm using again the selected county calculation. So this is just if the state and county combined match the parameter, then I double thens. Then I want to show the trend. If it doesn't, then I'm just setting it to no color. And this is one of the ways that I allow the entire state or all the counties in the state to have the hover functionality, but I'm only coloring the one that's selected. And let's make sure that these are all set up correctly. And I think we'll have to check these as well. Is there a way to do this all like, or do you just have to check?
Not to my, like, so it's interesting, like not to my knowledge, because like when you build table calculations and you save them, like the settings of them kind of save, but the overarching theme of table calculations are really dependent on the view comes into play. So I find myself redoing this every time. Like you could maybe save a step if you duplicated your table and then like changed the viz, but this is probably a more appropriate way to go through and error check. This is probably how I would do it, just to make sure that I was doing everything accurately.
I think that is everything, but maybe now this needs.
I think go back through, make sure that last date record filter is just up to true now. I feel like it might not be.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's correct.
There we go. Look at that.
There it is. Okay, so I'll just do some really basic coloring. I'll just make this red.
Alert red, fire.
Very red. I'm just gonna make that slightly less red. Okay, all right, so there we go. Once we've thoroughly checked all of our calculations and that our table calcs are all set up correctly using the appropriate dimensions, we have the same data that we were seeing in our table that we created before, the 33-day increase as of June 29th for Maricopa, Arizona. You guys are at 45,000 cases.
I think that's actually a little bit low. Like that's probably lagging a little bit. I think we're closer to almost, it's either 65 or 70, and we're doing about, oh my gosh, what was the number? I think it's like 4,000, 5,000 a day. No, I think it's 4,000 a day. So we're in a pretty bad spot right now. But this is like, I can't underscore how cool the filtering capabilities are in Tableau around this. Like this is only functioning because of that hierarchy of when filters actually happen on your vizzes, and knowing that table calculation filters happen at the very, very end is just like critical to this working. So beyond Maricopa County not being awesome today, this is an awesome viz just because of that one single filter in this view.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and important lessons with using context filters, because by narrowing it down to the state first, it's saving a lot of processing power, which is important when you're trying to run a lot of table calculations on all the counties in the United States, when you could just be running it for a handful of counties in a particular state.
Sure.
All right, so I think we have a few more. I mean, this was the bulk of kind of what we paid a lot of attention to with the table calculations and doing the comparison and getting the story. I mean, this was the basis for the entire story that we were trying to tell in the dashboard. Then everything else was just kind of cosmetic. But I think we want to touch on a few of those other cosmetic.
Yeah, I want to touch on those because these, I think, also represent some of the design emphasis you put in place and the conscious decision. I know when we talked about it, it was like, let's make it a mobile view, but there are some things that you put in there. When you pick a county, how, like you showed this, like when you pick a county, it's highlighted and the other ones are contextually there, but the emphasis is not there. And then you also have that nice little data table below it. And you've got some logic so that the county that's selected is first, and then you can see the peers in the same state and they're sorted. So I wanted you to show that just kind of quickly and talk through that.
Yeah, so we looked at how the color was done on the map initially, just a check at the very end, you know, if it's selected, then show the color. If it's not, then show it as no color, which is a good way to block everything else out. And then with the data table in the bottom, if we go here, you know, I'm using that selected county field pretty heavily and hiding it. So if I show it here, Davidson, in this view, we switched back over to the finalized version. Davidson, Tennessee is selected, so it's going to show at the top, and then everything else is going to show at the bottom. And then I believe there is sorting on the county itself that will sort by the total number of new cases. So it's going to put your selected county on the top line. And then I'm also using the selected county for color. This is something I started doing more frequently in certain visuals, but just making it a little bit more grayscale, but still dark enough to read, and then making the selection almost black. So you just have like a subtle difference between what's selected and kind of what is more contextual information.
And then as we wrap up, can you just kind of talk, like, one of the things I like about this is I like, obviously, the map and the data table are like today, the latest day, but I like how you also have the bar chart with the trend line. Can you just kind of go through that a little bit and talk about how you put the parameter in place and some of the visual choice, the design choices you made there with having like a nice dual axis and the color encoding of the lines?
Yeah, so one thing I noticed when I was like rewriting the moving average is, so I just pulled this from the out of the box Tableau calculation, and I noticed it would be really easy to parameterize this value. So I created a parameter for the moving average, and I set the value to the value that I would want to replace in the function, and then the display to be the 14-day or the 3-day. And then by doing that, I have a third calculation where I just replace that and reverse the sign. So that was kind of fun. And then I can do this nice like slider to automatically change it. So on my dual axis, I just have that XX day. So this would be really nice if, I know in a lot of organizations, I don't know if everyone's organization is like this, but people tend to change their minds a lot about, well, now we want to see the 23-day moving average. I set it up as a slider, but this would be a good way to put the power in the user's hands. You know, if we discover in a couple of weeks that we want to look at a 30-day average, we'd be able to change it easily. But I like how the slider turned out. Kind of nice,
Yeah, it's
kind of
nice
see the difference, especially in a and then the trend line, which is one of the calculations that we wrote that I kind of had built into this new, is the fixed date has people positive cases. I followed their naming convention, which is kind of confusing, but it's basically there are there are cases on that date, not new cases, just regular cases. So it starts with a date has cases. So it's, if the cases count is greater than 0, then I want to see the report date, and this is kind of a multi-tiered calculation. So this is the beginning part. Show the date if there are cases. If not, don't show it. And then I have a fixed calculation that's pulling the minimum date for each state and county combination. And then I'm using that fixed date as the trend.
Oh, nice.
So then as you select a different county, it's always going to start. I didn't want to have a bunch of like blank empty space at the beginning because the start of the US reporting is in January. But if you're looking at the county level, you want to know like when was the first case in my county. So I wanted to I wanted that to be the start point rather than the first reported case in the US.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice touch because, like, especially when you think about when you see, like, it's a good normalization technique. Like, if you're switching to different counties, like, you can just always focus in on this chart and trust, like, from start to finish what it looks like versus having a lot of blank, you know, time in there. So that's pretty cool. And then it also adds, like, additional information that's probably pretty imperative or important of, like, when did COVID actually show up in a county versus nationally. So I like that part about it as well.
Yeah, and internally, we were looking at kind of new cases and deaths side by side. And so having two bar charts, one that starts the first time there was a case reported and the other starting the first time, or it has the first case and the first death as a trend line, so you can kind of see comparatively the difference between those two values. Yeah. And especially on mobile, when you don't have a lot of space, any way to filter it and make it more relevant is always good.
Agree. Well, I think you've done a great job covering everything that you built here. I appreciate you taking time and sharing this. And you actually gave me a lot more knowledge around the COVID data that's out there. So this was kind of this was the first time I worked with it. So it was cool that we were able to kind of work through this together, and that it's still appropriate today as we're recording the solution video to have this conversation. It's funny when I think about trying to understand what's going on, I use this visualization, I use this view to kind of understand it, because I think it very much tells the story in a lot of different ways that make sense. It's much more digestible than, like I said, what I'm seeing on the news. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And it's nice that Tableau has made the data available and that we answered the question, like, can we automate it? And now you can pull a new hyperfile, you can pull a new Excel from Tableau, just like we did today. We pulled the fresh Jumpstart workbook and we're able to recreate it. And once it's created, it's really easy to keep up to date. So that was a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone for sticking around and watching the solution video. We hope you found this enjoyable.